Brian Marsden to the TA meeting. You started off as an amateur astronomer, I think, in the UK.
Many years ago. Many years ago. Yeah.
Can you give us a brief précis of how you got from a humble amateur to being probably one of the most important people in astronomy? Well, certainly one of the most quoted people in...
Quoted, yes. Well, I don't know. I suppose when I was an amateur I was interested in orbits and things and discoveries of things, so I was an assiduous reader of the IAU circulars from quite an early age. I happened to grow up in Cambridge, so it's a good place to do so, I suppose. And they had a set of the circulars at the observatory, and also the telegrams would come in, so I could keep up with things at that time, although I never really did any observing of them, but I would play around doing various kinds of calculations, I suppose. And it just sort of naturally led to my continuing that kind of work. I was a summer student at Hurstmansue for a couple of years when I was at university, and it was my interests were in mathematical astronomy, celestial mechanics, rather than the physical studies of celestial objects, which is more in vogue among most professional astronomers. So I wasn't really in the mainstream, one might say. It was recommended, actually Sir Richard Woolley, when he was the Astronomer Royal, so running these Hurstmansue summer student programs, suggested that I might go to Yale University to study celestial mechanics, which was the leading centre really in the world at that time. And so I did, and was enrolled as a graduate student there, and did the course, and then sort of stayed on. It was this was a good time, I might say, to have finished one's doctorate in astronomy and be looking for a job in the US in the early to mid-60s. There were lots of jobs available. It's never had it so good, will never be so good again, I don't think. So there were many opportunities at that time, and of the various job offers I had, I did choose the one that took me to Cambridge, Massachusetts, with Fred Whipple, with my interest in comets and in getting into some further calculations. And I also was aware that the Central Telegram Bureau was there. It had only just moved there, actually, from Copenhagen, and I did become involved with it. Owen Gingerich was directing it at that time, and he decided a couple of years later he was taking too much of his time, and so he passed it on to me. I've been doing that for 21 years.
And it keeps you fairly busy?
Well, actually, I also do other things too. There's also the Minor Planet Centre, which I've been doing for the last 11 years, since mid-1978. And that really keeps me busier, because there's much more work involved with that. The IAU circulars is perhaps only 10% of the total effort. There's a terrific amount of work on observing minor planets, asteroids nowadays, and I mean hundreds, thousands of observations every month, and orbits to be calculated, and we put out 150 pages of those every month. It includes comet observations and orbits, incidentally. The things that are not quite so urgent as warrant publication on the IAU circulars. So actually most of our work is on that. Occasionally, of course, I get a little time to write a few other papers, like this work I was talking about on the sun-grazing comets. I've been working on that whenever I've had a moment during the last few months, and wrote that up and sent it off to a journal to be published just before I started on this trip.
In this country, on our email system, Guy issues a large number of queries, and some of which turn out to be real discoveries, and a lot of them don't. Presumably you have the same thing at the Central Bureau.
Oh yes, this is very certainly true, and of course there are some of them when I ask Guy to help out. It's very convenient, actually, because if we get something in around noontime, let's say. Obviously that's late afternoon here, so I can let him know, and he gets someone to check it out in the evening and can get back to us, and it's still evening with us. So the time zones are good in that respect. We do get some, but I suppose over the years I've developed a rather blasé attitude with regard to them, and so I have an immediate initial impression as to whether something is likely to be real or not. And there haven't been too many cases that I have dismissed that have actually turned out to be real.
Have there been any?
Well, I suppose there is one. The one that still comes to mind is the case of Botham's Comet in 1975, because he sent it to us by letter. A letter arrived when the moon was full. He had actually claimed to discover comets before that could never be confirmed, although again there were often delays with them, and I really was rather skeptical about this. But to his credit, the observer followed it up to full moon almost himself and picked it up again after full moon and then sent us a telegram. And then, of course, the moon was a suitable phase that we could get other people onto it immediately, so that did work out. But still, that's the only case that I can remember of something that we didn't treat with perhaps the speed that it deserved, although he didn't either in sending us a letter that took 12 days to come from the Philippines.
But there's been a recent spate of supposed supernova discoveries at around the sort of magnitude 11s and 10s and things. One wonders why sometimes the Central Bureau doesn't buy itself a Celestron C8 or something and just look out the windows.
But that's a good, well, that's a good point. We don't have a very large staff. I don't do any observing myself. I suppose I could do some checking. But it's not so easy to check them. I think this is the whole point about supernova discoveries and attempts to confirm discoveries. You really have to be familiar with the field. And the reason that Bob Evans is so successful is that he has learned the particular galaxies. I mean, he's learned thousands of galaxies, and he's familiar with their features, and so knows immediately when something is there. But so often it happens that we get a report from somebody saying that there's a supernova in NGC 6207. I think that was one of the recent ones, and there's obviously some foreground star there. I've forgotten whether this NGC 6207, whether we got it. I think yes, we did get that one, and it came in a letter again from someone in North Carolina, and I did mention it to Guy. But I was looking I think he may have had someone try and check it out here, but I was looking a few days later among some pieces of paper we had from last year and discovered that somebody had reported it last year already as the same galaxy, the same. So I think we very much need a catalogue or something of all these foreground stars that people are likely to mistake for supernovae. But then if you do that, there are always going to be more. This is a never-ending situation, and I think that a lot of people go into supernova hunting thinking it's easy, and it isn't. It's extremely difficult.
Rob Evans is really the only one.
He is really the only one who does it visually, and there have been one or two amateurs doing it photographically, particularly in Japan. But apart from that, and unless you've got a really obvious supernova, in which case everybody will find it, so it doesn't matter, nothing is lost then, because it's quite clear if several people report the same thing. There may be a delay, of course, of a day or so in doing that, but really with a popular galaxy, I don't necessarily go to a lot of trouble. Now, we had this report of a supernova in M31 in November 1987 that was a real nuisance. I happened to be at a meeting that morning, and my colleague assistant was talking to Bob Kirshner, our supernova expert, and somehow there was a misunderstanding, and Kirshner thought it had been confirmed and told everybody about it. And the phone call multiplied by it like wildfire, and when I came back from the meeting there was a real chaos.
So you think the automated supernova patrols of people like Pennypacker are likely to put the amateurs, or specifically Rob Evans, out of business, and whether, mainly from my point of view, whether there are any automated galactic nova patrols that are coming along?
No, I don't think Pennypacker is going to put Evans out of business, and I think Pennypacker would be the first to admit that if he's honest, and he would. He has admitted that. The thing is, I'll take this M66 example recently. Bob Evans saw it immediately and called me up on the phone within a few minutes. It's true that Pennypacker had the supernova. He had it from several days earlier, but hadn't noticed it in the records. It wasn't only when alerted to it that he found it. That's not always true, of course, but it just shows that he's getting a lot of data, but not handling it. And I don't know that that matter will improve. I think he's interested in observing fainter and fainter supernovae. So he may be observing fainter and fainter galaxies and getting more and more data on them, but unless he solves the problem that he can examine the records in real time, because after all that's what Bob Evans does, then he's not going to put Bob out of business. With regard to nova patrols, it seems as though there's not an absolutely enormous interest in galactic novae. If something's fainter than 7th or 8th magnitude, nobody does anything with it. We had this one last year. We had indeed that one from David McAdam last year, and we passed word around. And Mark Kidger, for example, helped us out a lot in the Canaries. He tried to stir people up there, and all sorts of disasters happened that I think have been written up in the Astronomer magazine. It was a real fiasco, and then of course it went behind the sun, or at the same right ascension as the sun, and it was a while before it came out, and we eventually were able to get it confirmed. But that seems a little extreme, but it's not that extreme. There have been other cases like this. So I don't really think that nova hunting per se is going to catch on with professional astronomers.
It's still worth doing for amateurs.
Well, one would like to say that it is. That is a good point. I mean, why do it if nobody's going to do anything with them? But you can always find something interesting. There was this case of this X-ray nova a little while ago. This one that was reported in late May from Japan in Cygnus, and this was the one where I looked immediately on getting the report. I looked to see, I looked in my list of novae actually, and saw that there was one in 1938, just seen in 1938, just outside the other box. I toyed with the idea of mentioning this on the IAU circular, but it seemed a little far-fetched. It's not my field, so I didn't do it. And it was a day or so later that someone called me on the telephone. They wanted to make some observations. They wanted to know if there were any more information. And I said, well, no, we haven't received any more information, but I noticed this star. You might try looking at this star. And so they did, and sure enough, it had brightened up. And it was also just about that same time I'd contacted Guy, and Martin Moberly took some films himself, and Guy noticed that it was indeed this star that had brightened on them. So that nova interested a lot of people because it was seen in the X-rays. Yeah. But there's always a point about a nova that it might be a supernova, obscured. And so I think some of the professionals who ignore novae, just as an ordinary nova that isn't in X-rays and doesn't seem to be a supernova, might be deluding themselves and miss a great discovery. They could miss the supernova of the century, or the millennium.
That's what we're looking for.
Yes, right we are.
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving us